Hey folks, Valentin the Mad here, and today we'll be looking at the destruction in MechWarrior 5 Mercenaries. It's a game I was really curious about. You're controlling a massive mech in destructible environments, visual damage to mechs is a factor too, so this kind of stuff is right up my alley, and in this video we'll dive into the mechanics and see what the response is about. We begin with the buildings. As for the good, I haven't encountered a single unresponsive building or structure. You can either fully bring them down or, for the very least, chew them up from all sides. On the fully destructible ones, you will see generic rubble form below destroyed sections, which is an important touch. As I mentioned in the video on Men of War Assault Squad 2, it's definitely a feature I would like to see more of. Just generic debris after a section collapses. Much better than seeing mess disappear, which, as you can see, is an issue in this game as well in the chew-upable buildings. There is, however, a much larger issue. As in most games, the buildings are divided into sections. However, unlike most games, those sections are divided into clean squares. So usually what you have is rough-looking cutouts that deliver a convincing response when one is hit with explosives. Here, what you have is squares. A perfectly square transition between a damaged or destroyed section to a pristine one, which looks really bad and just wrong. So what you have is a very decent system really. The other aspects of it are fine in my opinion, but one very notable issue kind of spoils the whole thing, not entirely but by a lot. As for terrain and vegetation, you have craters after explosive hits. Trees can fall down, burn down, or get destroyed. And bushes can get burned down as well. Now, there is no terrain deformation, the craters are decals, the grass, as you can see it, doesn't get blown up. Crashing helicopters, exploding tanks and even exploding mechs won't activate craters. But, once again, there is a much bigger issue. In the aspect of terrain and vegetation damage, there is basically no aftermath. Craters disappear in about 35 seconds, toppled trees in about 12, burned bushes in about 30, destroyed vehicles in about 45, and mechs in about 2 minutes. The result is that anywhere outside of built areas, the locations will look untouched, literally untouched, shortly after the combat ends. And in my experience, most fights took place in those open locations. Most maps are open terrain and vegetation with patches of built areas, so this also is a very major issue. As I mentioned, mech damage is a factor too. The arms come off with 1 point of amputation. There's a damage state to each part of the mech that gets activated on a certain threshold of damage. And before the threshold is reached, you have a response at the point of impact too, which is very cool. I believe this one is based on a bump mapped overlay that gets reviewed at the spot that takes damage, but for the most part, it will deliver good feedback. Additional effects I've seen are smoke trails. Mechs will be limping if a leg gets a destroyed status. And mechs will explode only if a specific component takes enough damage, so in most fights they'll just get turned off. In some cases you can even salvage, restore and use them after the mission is done. But there are several issues in this aspect. The damage state doesn't quite look wrecked enough. especially for the final hits when the mech is no longer operational. And generally, mechs can take a lot of damage, they're supposed to, but the visual response as it is now doesn't deliver. So my suggestions would be the following. Those little roaches, and tanks too by the way, they could take less damage than they currently do. And as for the larger ones, I think that more devastating looking damage, both during the fight and for the final hit, would have made a big difference. Perhaps even several heavily damaged variations for each part to really deliver that tearing apart a huge machine feel. And of course, I should note the many destructibles you have scattered across the map. It is kind of amusing how, in this game, I guess it was a grain refinery, it basically counts as a small, destructible prop. And as you can see, it has a damage state too, which is a cool touch. In conclusion, honestly, I'm disappointed. I came to this game with a very strong bias towards liking it. I was legitimately waiting to dive into it because of what I mentioned at the start, but as you can see, there are some very notable issues. It does however emphasize the importance of lasting terrain and vegetation damage. That can make the difference between seeing a location get gradually torn apart, explosion by explosion, and a "did anything even happen here" feel. Once again, the mechanics are basically okay, but the disappearing mess really makes it feel quite underwhelming. So, that's it for today. Do let me know how you feel in the comment section, and if you enjoyed the video, subscribe and share it around. And consider supporting the channel on Patreon. For $1 a month you get these videos a week early, you get the interviews a week early, and you help out the channel. So a big thank you to all the Patreon members, and consider joining as well. Also, if you like the music you hear in the intro, outro, and in the background, the YouTube and Spotify playlists are in the description. Until next time.